Hello, everybody, and welcome to Painting with Rob Boss, or Drawing with Rob Boss today. Today we're going to be drawing an eye from a reference photo using a grid. You're going to need a pencil, a tortillon or blending stump, an eraser, a piece of 9 by 12 paper, a ruler, and a reference image. A colored pencil would also come in handy. Let's get started. Alright, so our first step here is going to be to lay out a grid on top of our photograph and on top of our sheet that we're going to be drawing on. So we want our grid in both cases to be 8 inches by 10 inches. So your printout here should be exactly, or pretty dang close, to 8 inches by 10 inches here. So I'm just going to use a ruler to lay out a grid on top of there. I'm going to start by laying my ruler across the page here horizontally, and then I'm going to make marks every inch. So I'm going to use a colored pencil, and that way the grid will stand out a little more. It'll be easier to see on the photograph. And I'll use regular pencil on my drawing paper. So, yeah, let's get started. I want to look at my pencil for a little bit. Okay, so I want to line up the 0 on my ruler with the very edge of the photograph. I'm going to make a mark every inch. After I do that, I'm going to flip the photograph and I'm going to do the same thing on the opposite side. And then I'm going to connect the marks together. And I want to mark on both the top and the bottom. And I want to start from the same side. So you can see I'm going to start on the left-hand side. When I flip it over, I want to start on the right. And that way it'll make sure everything lines up if my photo is a little bit off being perfectly 10 inches by 8 inches. And then I'm going to do the same process on the sides. So I'll start on the top, make a mark every inch, and then I'll flip to the bottom. I'm lining up on the right-hand side here this time so that I'm starting on the same side. I'll connect these marks to the marks I already did on the top, and then I'll do the same thing on the two sides, and it should make me a 1 inch by 1 inch grid. I want to be as careful and precise as I can with this. I'll get much better results that way. All right, so we're going to do a very similar process on our drawing paper here. Now our drawing paper is a different size. We still want to have an 8" by 10" grid on our drawing paper, but our drawing paper is 9 inches by 12 inches. So we're going to have a 1/2 inch margin at the top and the bottom, and a full 1 inch margin on the two sides with it laid out landscape orientation. So I'm going to do kind of the same thing here, except I'm going to start by making my margins. So I'll lay down my ruler. I'm going to make a mark at the 1/2 inch point. So I line up the 0 on my ruler with the edge of my paper there. And I'm going to make a mark just at 1/2 inch. Then I'm going to scoop my ruler over, and I'll make a mark every inch. Then I'll repeat that process on the bottom. I'll make a 1/2 inch margin, and then a mark every inch. And then I'll connect the top marks to the bottom marks, getting straight parallel lines. All right, so now I'm going to do the same thing going sideways. Now for this one, I've got a 12 inch paper and I want a 10 inch grid. So that means there's going to be a 1 inch margin on each side. So I just need to line up my 0 and make a mark every inch up to the 11 inch point. Same thing on the other side, and then connect them together to finally form the grid. Now I'm going to add labeling to each column and row. This just helps you to figure out where you are in the picture. It's really easy to get lost on these grids and put things in the wrong box. So if we label each column and row, it makes it a little easier to figure out where we're at. So I'm just going to go down the left-hand side. I'm going to start with A, and I'm just going to letter each row all the way A through H. I'm going to do the same thing on my drawing paper, and I can just do that in that margin. And then going across, I'm going to number 1 through 10 for each column. And I'll just add the same thing in the left-hand margin on my drawing paper, and then in that 1/2 inch margin along the top of my drawing paper. Now in the right-hand margin over here, I've got an extra inch. So I'm going to add a value scale. So I'm going to start in row B, and I'm going to work down 5 boxes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that's through row F. I'm going to do a 5-tone value scale. So I'm going to start off, I'm going to leave that top box empty. That's going to be the white of the paper. That's our highest value. And then I'm going to work down from there. So our second box should be me shading as lightly as possible. And I'm going to use a 4B pencil. It's a little bit softer than a regular number 2 pencil. And that means that the pigment will come off of it easier. So I want to shade that pretty much as lightly as possible. I want this to be like the minimum amount of shading on it while it's still being shaded. The next one down is going to be a middle tone. So I'll go just a little bit darker. But it's sometimes easier to start at the bottom. So after the middle tone, we'll have kind of a shading with the side of the pencil, applying some force. And then this bottom value here is using the tip of the pencil to get it as dark as possible. So I'll use the tip of the pencil to get this as dark as possible. And then I'll use the side of the pencil on the next value up. But I'll apply pressure so that it gets as dark as I can get the side to get. And then the next one up will be kind of in between that and the really light value I have in the number 2 position. All right, so you want to get your drawing to about here. Make sure that your grid is laid out on your photograph, and you can pause it here for as long as you need to get to this spot, and then we'll move on to the next step. All right, now we're going to do what's called the lay-in, which is basically just a simple sketch of what's going on in the image. And it's going to be our guideline as we add the shading, but we want to kind of lay in the important edges. So I'm going to look at the kind of eyelid where it's touching the white of the eye. I'm going to look at the iris and the pupil. I'm going to look at some of the shadows that are created in the eye folds up here. And I want to just kind of lay in some lines to guide me when I start the shading process. So I'm not going to worry too much about the values to start, but then I'll add some shadows in our next step here. So as I do the lay-in, I want to look at where each of the important lines I'm drawing intersects with the grid. I want to ask myself in my mind, how far up is this intersection happening? And try to mark that. So I'm going to add this up here now. I'm going to start by looking at the line and seeing where it intersects with the grid in different places. And I'm actually going to mark those intersections and then connect them together to create my sketch. So I'm starting here with the sort of tear duct, or that inside corner of the eye, and then I'm going to kind of sketch in from there. I'm looking at where that intersects with the line, the horizontal line here. That's about 1/3 of the way, and then I see that it intersects just above the corner. I'm going to kind of do that same thing all the way through. But I'm going to start by marking the position where the line intersects. So I can see that there's an intersection here, then another one here, and so on and so forth. Once I get those all laid out and figure out where those intersections happen, I'll add the line in, and I'll complete my layout drawing that way. So I'm going to speed this up, and you can see how I do all that, and you kind of follow along. Alright, so there's my lay-in. You can pause the video right here and get caught up, and then we'll move on to the next step. Alright, so now for the next step, we're going to block in the shadows. So what I really want to do is kind of squint my eyes and simplify the image, make it a little blurrier. And I want to look at all the areas that are shadows. So if I look at my value scale on the right, it's going to be anything that's a 4 or a 5. And I want to kind of block those in as much of a solid, flat, massive shadow as I can. So I'm going to work through those and try to add shadow to all the places I see it. And then I'm going to go back in and work on what we call the highlights and halftones, which are the 1s, 2s, and 3s on my value scale, and add those in. At the end, I'll be adding my really dark shadows, my 5s, but I saved that because those are mostly going to be details. And the later I do them, the more of that darkness and value they'll be able to retain during the drawing process. So go ahead and follow along with me and just block in anything you see that looks like a shadow, looks like a 4 or 5 on that value scale on the right side of your page. Okay, so now I have those shadows pretty much laid in. They don't have to be perfect, you just want them in the general area. You can use your Tertullian to smooth them out as much as you want, but we can wait on that as well. You can pause here for a little while to get all caught up and get those shadows all blocked in, and then we'll add the highlights and halftones. Alright, so now we're going to add highlights and halftones. I think the easiest way to do this is kind of taking a column by column approach. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our reference sheet in just a second here, and we're going to fold it so that I can just see the first column, column number 1. And I'm going to lay that down and line it up with my paper. Kind of flattening out the shadows here before I get started with that. But then I'm going to work column by column, and I'm going to look at the first column in the picture and compare it to the first column in a drawing. I'm going to work down row by row and try to make each box in the grid match the reference image as much as possible. So I'll take my sheet here and I'm just going to fold it right about here. And I'll fold it along each column, and you could do it by row as well, that'd be fine. And I'm going to compare it. So I don't really need to fold it for the first one, but I'll lay this next to it. I'm going to try to make the first column match the first column of my image as closely as possible. So I want to look at each area and try to figure out how much value I see, and whether it's a 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, and try to darken it or lighten it as I need to. I can lighten with my eraser and I can pull things out. I can also darken with my pencil or smooth things together and blend with my tortillon. These are my kind of 3 options going through this. And I want to work each column one at a time and work down each box, each row one at a time, and just try to make the image as similar to my reference as I can. And once I finish each column, I'll make a new fold and then line it up and draw from there. This has the added benefit of shielding my drawing paper from smudging with my hand, because my hand is resting on my reference image, and it's going to help keep the pencil from smearing. If you are left-handed, I would recommend you start on the other side and work from column 10 over towards column 1, going the other direction. That way you can again use the sheet to protect your drawing underneath. If you don't have a reference sheet, or you don't want to fold it up or whatever, if you're working from a screen, anything like that, you can just take a piece of scrap paper, sometimes it's easier if you fold it in half, and just put that under your hand as you draw, and that'll also help protect the drawing. So either of those methods should work out just fine for you. But that's the basic idea. So this is going to take a little while, I'll speed it up, but the idea is to just work through each column, making it as similar to the original image as possible. And you really want to look at the shape of each tone, each value, and try to replicate it as much as you can. But use the grid to break up and simplify the image into tiny 1" by 1" sections, and try to shade them as closely to the original as you can. I'm also going to wait to do the eyelashes. You can add the eyelashes in now if you want, but I like to save the details and the really dark stuff for the very end. So I'm going to wait to add the eyelashes. If you want to start adding them in as you go through this process, that's totally fine. But I'm going to wait to do that until I'm finished with this next pass. At this point, I'm going to spend a little bit of time refining the image as a whole. I can use my reference sheet as a drawing shield and lay my hand on it so I don't smear too much, or you can fold a piece of scrap paper. Either of those will work just fine. But I'm just going to try to work the image as a whole and break up some of the grid a little bit. Depending on how much detail you have in a given area, you may want to use the grid for it. It can be really helpful in high detail areas. In low detail areas, like the upper and lower right-hand corners, you may not need to use the grid as much. You can see in this image, all the corners are kind of lower detail than the actual eye parts. So if you want to focus on using the grid more on the sections that are a little trickier, that can be a perfectly good way to do it. So here I'm folding this shield sheet in there. I'm going to use that to protect my drawing as I continue shading and trying to get it as close to the image as I can. So you can kind of go back and forth between using your reference image directly right next to it and kind of working on the thing as a whole. It can be good to kind of switch the way you're working as you make more and more passes on this drawing, getting it tighter and tighter and more refined. I'm also going to use my eraser to pull out some of the highlights here. Sometimes it's a lot easier to shade something and then use the eraser to lighten streaks like we have here than it is to just try to draw around light areas. An exception to that would be like the bright highlight that you can see on the iris. That I kind of marked off from the beginning, and I've tried to keep clean the whole way through. Anything that is like a pure bright white, you want to probably kind of protect it and not rely on erasing, because oftentimes it's very difficult to erase every little last bit of pigment off. I'm also going in and starting adding eyelashes in. I'm trying to pay attention to where those are and try to replicate them, but it doesn't necessarily have to be perfect. Things sometimes get to a level of complexity where you have to make a judgment call about whether you're going to try to get exactly what's there or if you're just going to try to replicate the feel and pattern of what's there. So I'm loosening things up and going a little more with the feel and pattern. But if you want to have a highly accurate image, you can use that grid and really get accurate with your eyelash placement. There are just some places where the focus is a little looser and it's hard to track everything that's going on. I'm also using the side of my pencil, and I'm applying a little more pressure at the base of the eyelash to make it thick, and then lifting a little bit as I go on to make it kind of pointed at the end. It almost makes kind of a sharp hook shape to it, which is nice for the eyelash strokes. As you can see, the eyelashes are darker in the reference image than I'm getting on the paper. Part of that's just the graphite's not going to get as dark as the ink. But part of it, I'll actually have to go back in and darken the eyelashes a little bit more in the finishing phases of this drawing. All right, so this will be another good place to stop and try to get caught up as much as you can to where I'm at. Then after that, we're going to go into just details and refinement. So I'll get back with you and kind of explain what I'm doing, and then we'll run through that. All right, so here's a sped up clip of the refinement process as we work through here. This is just kind of me cleaning things up, working from left to right, or right to left if you're left-handed, and just trying to make everything a little bit closer to the picture, just one column and one box at a time until I get it as refined as I can. And this phase can take many hours. I could spend another 2 hours on this and get really tremendous results. But trying to work within our time constraints here. It's just kind of what I did, trying to keep it to about an hour and a half of work. So, yeah, you can kind of see what I do. Alright, so here's our finished image. You can definitely continue to refine it. There's still a lot to do. You can put in time and make it much sharper than it is right now. But I'm going to leave it here because I've already been working for probably an hour, hour and a half easy. So try to get it to this point or even above and beyond. And thank you for watching. We'll see you next time on Painting with Rob Boss. Hello, it's time for viewer mail. So we got a question today. This question comes from Chad 6'8", 7'2", 7'7", 6'8", 7'7", 6'2", 2'2", Chad rules 8'3", 9'2", 5'7", 7'7". Chad writes, sick nunchuck skills. Why did you include those in a painting video, though? I'm having trouble understanding. I put the nunchucks in the painting video because of two things. One, I want everybody to understand the importance of having a well-balanced life. It includes some kind of fitness routine. And I prefer the chucks. Nothing really gets me as amped to get some exercise in as nunchucking. The other thing is, YouTube can be a rough place. There are a lot of trolls and bullies and trolleys around here. And I wanted them all to see, right up, first and foremost, right at the front of the video, what kind of skills that I have. So they would respect those skills and not mess with me. Because that's a big mistake, obviously. You can see from my chucking skills that messing with me is a big mistake. I'm also personal friends, I try not to name drop, with a very famous bounty hunter from TV. And boy, when we get together, let's just say, you better not be messing with either of us, because he's been on both sides of the law. And he knows how to get results. To be clear, this is not a threat in any way. I'm not threatening anybody. I'm saying be nice in the comments. Not just to me. I'm a big boy who can nunchuck super good. I can take it. But to everybody. Be kind out there. Even online. Even anonymously. You never know who you're going to be messing with and how hard they can nunchuck you in the face. Alright. That's it for this week. Thank you, everybody, and we'll see you next time on Painting with Rob Boss. Tell me that you ain't. We're gonna draw, 'cause I'm laying down the law. We're gonna art.
You